Okay, today we're going to begin the next section of Isaiah, starting in chapter 13. This section goes all the way to chapter 27. Now, we're not going to read that part today. I think today we'll get through chapter 20 or 21, and then we'll save the rest of it for next time. This section is about other nations surrounding Israel. Isaiah has more to say than just stuff about Judah and Jerusalem. Now, everything he says is in the context of how it pertains to Judah and Jerusalem, but he does have plenty of things to say about other nations. And so we're going to be reading a series of prophecies here that Isaiah spoke against the other nations. These, except for one of these prophecies is dated. One of them is given to be in the year that King Ahaz died, which I think is 715 BC, as we count it, as we reckon it today. The others are not. None of the other prophecies are given a date, so we don't know when he had these visions, or oracles, burdens. That's the word he uses. The word that we see in the English in this translation is oracle. In other translations, sometimes it's called burden. So we don't know when he got most of these, except for one where he actually gives us the year and the occasion. They seem to, so it's, and that makes it a little bit tricky sometimes to know what exactly he's talking about. We are going to be entering a section here where it is going to be difficult to determine exactly what these prophecies mean. And we're going to have to be honest about that, be humble about that some of these things we can only really guess at. He's talking to people of his day about the nations of his day and what's going to happen to the nations of his day at some point, either in his day or shortly after. And this is 700 BC we're talking about here, okay? We know some things that happened in this time period due to records left in the Bible and elsewhere. Okay, but there's a lot we don't know about what happened 2,700 years ago. Alright, so some of this stuff is going to be ambiguous. And I'm going to say also here, speaking personally, I myself am not as much of an expert in some of this stuff. So even though some of these things may be referring to events that we know about from extra-biblical sources in history, I may not be aware of some of these things. Okay, because we are talking about prophecies that were uttered in the 720s or 710s BC, 2,700 plus years ago, about the nations that existed at that time, and that were to be fulfilled in that day or shortly after. And it's going to be hard to know exactly what, and it's couched in figurative language. These prophecies are not meant to be interpreted or understood literally, word for word. And so it is going to be hard in some cases to be confident about exactly what Isaiah is saying. The overall thrust of his message is clear, though. We can understand the overall content of his message and the point behind it, even if some of the details are just going to be fuzzy to us. This is also, we're entering this time period now where the prophets do. I mentioned before, and I've said this many times now, that a prophet's job was not to speak the future per se. We think a prophecy is telling the future. And they did do that some. But their purpose, a prophet's mission, what made a prophet, was that he spoke the message of God. He spoke the message that God put in his mouth to speak, whatever that message was. Sometimes that message did pertain to the future. Many times it was couched as a warning or an admonition to stop doing to whoever the prophet was talking to whoever people he was talking to stop doing whatever it was they were doing before things turned out badly for them in their future, or maybe in the days of their sons or grandsons. Okay? So yes, they did talk about the future. Sometimes they gave very detailed predictions about the future. We're going to see that mainly in the book of Daniel when we get there. But their job, and Isaiah did too, Isaiah saw in his visions a scope of history going on 200 years, even beyond his day. So they did do that. They did talk about the future. They did. But that was not the primary purpose of their mission. Their purpose of their mission was to speak the message God put in their mouths, to speak whatever that may have been. That's what Isaiah did, okay? Now, in this case, Isaiah does start talking, I mean, we've already kind of seen it with the references to the prophecy of this virgin birth child, which is going to happen 700 years from now. So Isaiah has already been prophesying about things that will be fulfilled many, many years later. Now, those signs that he talked about had an immediate fulfillment in his day, which you mentioned before, in the birth of his own son, Mahar Shalal Hashbaz. But his ultimate fulfillment was not to be for another 700 plus years. So Isaiah is doing that. He's going to do it here too. And we're going to see this continue throughout the rest of the book as he starts talking about things that are not only going to happen beyond his generation, but a few generations beyond him. In particular about Babylon. And we're going to start here in Isaiah 13 with an oracle about Babylon. Now, before I get into this, I should mention a couple things that we need to keep in mind about Babylon. Okay, Babylon at this point now, where Isaiah is speaking here sometime probably in the 720s or 710s BC. We don't know, except for one prophecy in Isaiah 15, or 6, excuse me, 7, somewhere in here. End of 14, actually, just before 15. For the most part, these prophecies are not going to be dated. Isaiah does give us the date for one of his prophecies against Philistia. So we don't really know exactly when he got these visions. It seems like, judging from the context, it seems like most of these came to him in the 720s or 710s BC, in the latter days of King Ahaz, or maybe in the early days of King Hezekiah. There's something we have to consider. So that's this general time period, 720, 710 BC. When he talks about Babylon, okay, so Babylon is a nation that is far to Israel's east, across the desert. It's east of Assyria. Assyria is northeast of Israel, and Babylon is southeast of Assyria. Babylon is basically now in Iraq, in southern Iraq, near the Gulf of Persian Gulf, not Gulf of Mexico, near the mouth of the Persian Gulf. At this point in time, Babylon was not a dominant power. It will be in about 100 years, but it is not yet. Babylon, in fact, was fighting against Assyria for its own independence. Assyria was a dominant power, and Babylon was trying to get rid of Assyria and fight against it. And they would fight Assyria for 100 years. Babylon hated Assyria more than any other. Everyone hated Assyria, but no one hated Assyria more than Babylon did. So Babylon is going to be fighting Assyria for another 100 years to come. They'll finally get them in 612 BC. Babylon will finally win this fight, destroy Assyria in 612 BC. That's 100 years from now, okay? Isaiah is speaking roughly 100 years before that happens. And before that happens, Assyria is actually going to destroy Babylon and conquer it. And the king of Assyria will become known as the king of Babylon. Okay, so I mentioned this to help set the idea in our heads that when we talk about Babylon, it's a little fuzzy whether we're talking about Babylon as an independent, because Babylon will eventually then, after they become the dominant power, they will become the enemies of Israel, or Judah, I should say, the southern kingdom of Judah, and they will conquer Judah and take it into captivity in 586 BC. So they will be to Judah what Assyria is to Israel, the nation that destroys them and takes them away. Babylon will also be the judgment of wrath of God on Assyria someday. Assyria is going to be punished for its own wickedness, and Babylon is going to be the tool God uses to do that. Okay? But at this point in time, that's still 100 years in the future, and Babylon itself has 100 years of domination under Assyrian dominance to go through before it gets to that point. So it's a little fuzzy here whether we're talking about Babylon as it exists under Assyrian domination or Babylon as it exists 100 years from now when it's the big kid on the block and throwing its weight around and destroying other nations. Because the king of Assyria is going to be called the king of Babylon. Babylon is going to be made into a province of Assyria. I forget exactly when that happened. I think it was Esarhaddon who comes along later, but I'm not entirely certain. I'll have to look that detail up. I'll include it in the text description of this video when I post this video online someday. But at some point, Assyria is going to conquer Babylon, and the king of Assyria will be known as the king of Babylon. So these judgments, these oracles against Babylon, could be coded oracles against Assyria in the context of Assyria at this time dominating Babylon and the king of Assyria assuming the role of the king. Because a lot of this prophecy is going to be against the king of Babylon. Not any specific individual, but just the title of king of Babylon. However, this could actually be referring to the king of Assyria, who for a period of time will also be known as the king of Babylon. So I just wanted to set that context because we don't really know. Again, this whole section of Isaiah is fuzzy in terms of how exactly the particulars of these prophecies got fulfilled in history. And so I wanted us to be clear that, yes, he's talking about Babylon, but I at least can't be certain whether this is Babylon as it will be in Nebuchadnezzar's day or even later, which is 100 plus years from now, or Babylon as it exists shortly after this when it is actually a colony and dominated by Assyria. And so this is really a statement against Assyria. I just don't know. Okay? I just don't know. Okay, so anyway. I'm going to go ahead and start a new video. Might as well. This has been going on for 11 minutes already, so might as well start a new video.